without further ado, would like to introduce our panel today. So we have Betsy Greytok from IBM. Betsy Greytok is the Vice President of Ethics and Policy in the Chief Privacy Office for IBM. She works closely with IBM AI Ethics Board, developing principles, practices, and policies, driving the ethical development and deployment of technology. We also have Kathy Baxter, who's a principal architect of ethical AI practice at Salesforce, where she develops research-informed best practices to educate employees, customers, and the industry on the development of responsible AI. She's a member of Singapore's Advisory Council on the ethical use of AI and data. She's a visiting fellow at NIST, and she's on the board of Equal AI. And we're also joined by Avi Weiss from Israel, who has over 20 years of executive and entrepreneurial experience in the technology industry. He founded and exited 2 companies in the cybersecurity and fintech domains. Today, Avi leads Datomize, a startup focusing on synthetic data generation and data privacy. Okay, so just to open the floor here, when we talk about responsible AI or trustworthy AI or ethical AI, it really means a lot of different things to a lot of people. But most folks tend to cluster this, at least in our discussions, around 3 areas: privacy and surveillance, bias, fairness, and discrimination, and transparency and explainability. So this question is for all the panelists. How do you define responsible AI, and how does your organization define responsible AI?
So I can go first, if that's okay?
Please.
Yeah, so we have, excuse me, published our principles and of trustworthy AI. And so really for responsible AI, trustworthy AI is an embedded definition within that. So for trustworthy, we rely on 5 pillars, which is very similar to what you mentioned. We have privacy and fairness and transparency and explainability. And then what wasn't included in your list, but we also include is robustness, so that it's not vulnerable to attacks and it can withstand high traffic. And so we add in robustness in the term of trustworthy AI. And then to look at responsible AI, you take it just a little bit step further, and that's really taking a trustworthy AI model and then using it in a social or environmentally responsible manner. So pretty simple. And yeah, I do agree that the industry is kind of coming around those same common themes.
I can go next. So I've put into the chat the link to our trusted AI site, which lists our 5 trusted AI principles. And so they're very similar as well, you know, different names, but all of the same kinds of concepts. I think one thing that I want to call out or differentiate is what is the difference between ethical AI and responsible AI? Those tend to be used interchangeably, at least internally when we talk about it. Ethical AI is often referred to as the ethical lens. How do you go about deciding what is right, what is wrong, what you want to achieve, what is it that you are trying to mitigate or avoid? And so you could take that from a philosophical lens, like utilitarianism or deontology or social contract. For us, we look at the UN guiding principles on human rights. And so first and foremost, our number 1 principle is to be responsible, and that's protecting human rights. And so it incorporates a lot of things. It includes safety, it includes privacy, and many of those other aspects. And then responsible AI is the process. What are all of those things that you do as you're developing and implementing AI to make sure that it is in line with your principles? So assessing your models for bias or robustness, those types of things. So thought I would throw out those 2 different pieces that oftentimes they're just kind of munged together, but I think it's a worthwhile exercise to think of them as 2 separate things.
So can I take the...
Please, Avi, yeah.
So at Datomize, we actually took the data-driven approach dealing with the ethical privacy and transparency through the data. So we believe that the model will be as good as the data is. And so we decided to start with the data and to deal with the data. I just want to say that our augmented synthetic data platform dealing with structured, tabular, and free text fields data, not with computer vision. It's very important to say what we are not doing, only with that. By doing that, we believe that the ability to dissociate the private and personal data from its source data and use it independently for multiple purposes, it's key, and that's addressing the privacy and surveillance and security dimension of that. To deal with the fairness, bias, and ethical issues, we provide an engine. It's a generative AI engine under the hood that automatically making an assessment of the source data set that is subject to work, and we identifying the weaknesses and the gaps as far as bias, fairness, balancing, and all of that stuff, and we actually present it to the user, and the user determine how to deal with that, how to fix it. So it's through that we're minimizing the bias and fairness. And last but not least, the explainability. While we have anomalies, etc., we discover it as well through the assessment and giving the user the ability to deal with that in that manner.
Great, thanks. So next is more an enterprise focused question. So this is more for Kathy and Betsy. Where does the executive accountability for responsible AI or ethical AI, I'm not sure which term we'll use here, where does that live in your company? Is it a functional role? Is it a product or business unit role? Do you have an independent ethics advisory board? How do you ensure a holistic approach to ethics in the enterprise?
Kathy, you want to kick off?
Sure. So we have kind of a hub and spoke model. So we've got our chief ethical and humane use officer, Paula Goldman. And within that, our group, we have our ethics by design team, which my group is part of, working with product teams as well as customers and then external engagement. We have our policy team, and they are the ones that add things into our acceptable use policy, our red lines. How do we not what are the things that we don't allow customers to do with our products? And then our accessibility and inclusive design team. And so we're a fairly small team, but we have other folks that we work with throughout the company. So for example, Greg Bennett, we work very closely with him. He is a conversational designer and linguist for chatbots. So in order to be able to go across the entire company, you really do have to have that kind of hub and spoke model when you get of a certain size. And we do have an ethics advisory council. It is comprised of frontline employees, executives, as well as external experts from academia or civil society with expertise in human rights or disinformation or AI emerging technology. We meet on a quarterly basis for all group discussions, but then we have subgroups that we meet more frequently as issues come up.
So we have kind of similar a hub and spoke. Definitely have reached the size where we've got to get across the entire corporation. So our ethics review our ethics review policies really were baked in our research department, our research group, and they developed an ethics review board to start looking at ethical issues around technology, not just the ethicals, not your typical ethical questions for research, but related to technology, largely coming out of machine learning. And that review board was working very well. And so we took that review board and revamped it, and it is now across the corporation. So it is co-chaired by Francesca Rossi, who is in research and is our AI Global AI Ethics leader, and Christina Montgomery, who is our Chief Privacy Officer. And we put that with our Chief Privacy Officer because there are so many areas that we saw overlapping with privacy. And so it made a good sense, move for us to combine those roles. So Christina and Francesca now chair this review board. The review board helps us establish the policy, the corporate directives, and does review of use cases. So a particular issue related to a very defined use of AI or other ethical issues coming out of the technology, those go before this review board. The review board is made up of senior leaders across the company hitting our business unit. So it is a business unit responsibility to comply with the policies, but also our corporate functions. So as you might imagine, our HR corporate function is very engaged with this board and has a large presence there. Diversity and inclusion has large representation there, but every business unit, including, our systems, our cloud, our consulting group, they're all represented on this board. The board then reports up to our privacy advisory committee. Again, the privacy had a lot of overlap. This advisory committee was already in place and we could get some synergies working with this group. It is made up of our senior vice presidents who report directly into our CEO. So to the extent that there's any debate or a policy that's going to greatly impact one of our business strategies, we do have the right eyes on the policy in question and making sure that we've got correct communication. We've found that really helpful because then you have thought leadership coming from the very top that is embracing these ethical principles and saying that, yes, this is important to our entire corporate strategy. Arvind has said that trust is our license to sell. And so it's very important that you do have that leadership demonstrating that from the very top. But below the board, like Kathy was describing, we call them focal points. And so they're more of the boots on the ground. They're within each business unit. We go across geographies so that we're hitting other countries. And then again, cover the corporate functions. And these are people who are training in these issues and are tasked with finding the ethical issues. As you imagine, a corporation of our size with so many different uses of AI, making sure we're communicating to the sales team, to the developers, to the designers, the people really working with our customers who are coming up with the proposals, so that we can gather that information and that feedback. So you create a very nice symmetry here in which you're getting information and feedback from the end users through our customers, who are typically enterprises, up through the policy makers and our decision makers. And then, of course, it's flowing back down. So it creates that very nice flow of conversation and a very nice breadth across the corporation.
Fantastic. So I'd like to take it now more towards the data side. And the question here is around, many companies have begun to address the operational aspects of data management, including how to build data pipelines or maintain a data lake. But enterprises must also grapple with the ethical aspects of data management, which often lie upstream. What are some common data ethics traps that enterprises are falling into, such as thinking in silos, ignoring the origin of training data, or consent management with regard to third-party vendors? What have you encountered?
So
Go
maybe
ahead,
no, I'm sorry. So I think there are a few, dimensions to this. I think the first one is dealing with the privacy and personal data. And if it's not transformed into safe data, it will carry consent of and privacy issues down the stream with it. And organizations need to be very careful and pay attention to the origin of the data to make it more safe, and that will enable them to produce models to avoid such dependencies on the, on the personal data and uploading it to the cloud, et cetera, et cetera. So dealing with the privacy and personal data, this is one major thing. The other one is towards the ethics and what we mentioned earlier, the bias and fairness is dealing with unbalanced data or data with very bad fairness parameters, anomalies that usually will generate biased model and models with low accuracy and robustness. And to deal with that upfront from the data will minimize those risks. That's what we see in our experience.
We have an enterprise take.
Yeah, I think so. Some of you asked for some of the pitfalls that you might run into. I think one of them is that people I've seen discussion of, well, you have to make sure your data is error-free. I'm kind of at the position that I don't think there is such a thing as error-free data. I think, to Avi's point, it's critical that corporations understand what is in the data and what flaws exist, and then create engineering solutions to deal with that error within the data. I think you're going down a fool's path to think that you can come up with error-free data. And so you have to learn how to deal with that. And the other aspect that I am thinking of is, as you are trying to find a bias within the data and you hone in on certain aspects. And so I can give an example in which, so if you're talking about screening candidates, so Kathy, this one you may want to weigh in on this, but if you're thinking about screening candidates and you say that you don't want to have certain biases that come if you leave in information related to which college the applicant attended, and perhaps you want to make sure that you're bringing in candidates that are coming from community colleges and being more diverse, and so you're going to take out the college information of the data and train your model on that, and hopefully get rid of some of the biases that can come in when you're looking at the names of colleges. The problem with that is if you leave in some of the other aspects that you may be looking at on a resume, you may be attracting that college bias back in. So for instance, if you're requiring a certain internship, I can do this from a law degree background. Let's say that you require that your candidate have a judicial clerkship. That is going to draw back in some of the biases that you would get for the higher tier schools, because those clerkships tend to only go to certain schools or certain types of areas within the country. If you're in a rural area of the country, then it's much harder to get a judicial clerkship than as it is if you're in an urban area. And so making sure that as you try to bake a bias out of the data and manage the data so that you can address that you're actually thinking through all of the different aspects, which is why it is very important to have a team reviewing it and not too small, not too, making sure we're including that diversity element.
Yeah, I think asking for model cards from third parties is important. So what data were used, if you're using a third party model or tool, understanding very, very clearly what data were used, what kinds of bias and robustness assessments were done. Are there any proxy variables, to the point that you were making, Betsy? Are there any proxy variables at play? So having a very good understanding of what you're using. The World Economic Forum has an AI toolkit for public sector procurement. So it was really designed for governments that are buying third-party AI, but the toolkit can be used by anybody. And it offers a lot of questions and things to consider if you are going to purchase a third-party system from someone else.
That actually kind of leads right into the next question, which was right around procurement and supply chain. So foundational models like GPT-3, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, and AlphaCode have actually demonstrated that they contain biases and generate stereotyped and prejudiced content. Given how many downstream applications these models are piping into, AI vendors can present a tremendous, these different vendors can present a tremendous source of risk for the enterprise. Can you share how you filter and evaluate AI vendors for these risks in your procurement process?
Yeah, I can take a go at that one, Emmanuel. So one, we do have tools that we use to examine, and I'll add in a link to our research page because they have published a paper on this, but researching into how you test the foundational models yourself, looking for the bias. So one thing is not just taking it from a vendor as is, but we do our own in-house testing of that. But we also are baking into our procurement processes these ethical considerations and advocating for adoption of the 5 principles that I outlined, and then measuring the tools that we may be procuring from them against those 5 principles. And I will include a link. There's a group called the Data and Trust Alliance, and they published some safeguards for companies that may be acquiring HR-related AI from a third-party vendor. And I'd point that out, not just for, you need to adopt this as it is, but it certainly gives a good example of questions you may want to be asking of your vendors and ways that you can ensure that they are not only just talking the talk, but walking the walk as far as addressing ethical principles.
Great. Yeah, we'll distribute those links as we get those too. So anyone else want to take a stab at that? Or we kind of covered that in the last one. Why don't we go to the next one here, which is around case studies. And really here, what I'd like to ask is, well, our viewers want to know, or our members want to know, not just the successes, but also the failures and what sort of price there was. So could you please share an example that you or your company have dealt with where the risk was not properly managed? And was there a price to pay? Please describe a scenario of what went wrong and why.
So maybe I'll start with 2 case studies where we had with customers. I, of course, wouldn't disclose the customers, that we're able to fix things that went wrong, and by that improving the model accuracy and robustness, if it's okay.
Please.
So, as I said, we are taking the data-centric approach, and we see it as a key to ethical AI. So I would like to share with you 2 case studies, very short. I'll do it in a short way. So case study 1, we had a leading financial consulting firm that developed a model to predict customer income in order to and give them the ability to make better decision when it comes to loan approval and the rate settings. The model was wrongly predicted its customers' monthly income and failed to aid such a decision. Mainly once we analyzed and make the assessment of the data set, the source data set that they were using, we discovered bad balancing and some fairness and fairness issues, as well as the size of the data they started was too small. By providing them our, data augmented, the smart augmentation, while we also rebalanced it, we are able to retrain the same model that they used originally on the new synthetic replica, and by that they achieved a production level prediction. I can say they increased it to above 90% accuracy that the company can rely on, and they uploaded it to their production. The other use case is a Fortune 50 global food manufacturer, retailer and food manufacturer. They could not achieve the required accuracy when it developed the model to predict what they called product shelf time prediction. They have snacks, beverage, etc., and each one of them has expiration date. they got to a glass ceiling of 70% accuracy. It means that 30% of the time they were wrong. Again, they had small data set and bad balancing of the source data. By doing smart augmentation, we enlarged this data set 20 times on the original with the smart augmentation and rebalanced it. They achieved a 92.4% accuracy with that model that brought them to a production level. Again, on those two cases, the balancing was wrong. That impacted bias, and as well as the augmentation helped to do that. I hope I was able to address it a bit.
Perfect. Okay, we'll move on to the next one here. So I guess Datomize is actually one of these responsible AI tools, but we are looking at also the entire ecosystem of ethical AI startups that have emerged to help enterprises deal with many of these challenges. What third-party tools does your enterprise use to address data privacy or AI governance challenges? Do you have any specific, any ones you could share with the group?
So I'm pretty fortunate because I'm sitting here with an R&D group that has dug very heavily into creating these tools. And so we do tend to use internal tools for most of our testing, but we are big proponents of making those tools available via open source. So I'll share with you the link. It comes through our research team. And we've made a lot of tools. We talked about some of them earlier, but let's see, we have adversarial robustness toolbox, a privacy toolbox, explainability, fairness, and the fact sheets, as well as some other additional tools that teams can pick up and start using. And then if you follow that website and some of the publications, it lets you know where we're headed next. And like I mentioned, it's got a paper on how to look at foundational models and how we should be testing those as well.
We also developed some of our own tools. So we have the Omni XAI explainability toolkit. In some cases, we also use IBM's open source, so the AI 360 fairness. And then we announced a strategic partnership last year with Amazon to use to integrate their SageMaker product into our CRM platform for pro code users. Our AI is primarily no code and low code. And so anyone internally at Salesforce that builds models on the SageMaker platform will use the Clarify toolkit for fairness and explainability analysis of models.
We do have some questions that are starting to come in. If you guys have any, feel free to submit them. We'll have one or two more questions and we'll open up the floor. But one of the questions that came in is relevant here. It's for Betsy. Can you share more about how IBM Fairness 360 empowers enterprises to embed transparent AI development in their company?
So again, it's a tool that checks for unwanted bias within the data sets and the machine learning sets. And so I'm gonna have to turn to Kathy on this because technically, how does it work? I don't know, but it does work, and it helps you figure out where you've got a problem and go back and re-engineer to. And again, it goes back to Avi's basic point, which is you're going to find flaws within the data, and it's all about engineering to address those flaws. So, Kathy, maybe you can share some more insight on how it actually works.
Oh, I'm not going to talk about the technicalities of it. That's what our data science team is for. I am not a data scientist. I am not a computer scientist. So want to make that super clear. But the thing that I like about IBM's tools is that there are multiple definitions of fairness or bias, for example. And so you can go through and you can do the analysis using those different definitions and see what the output is for different groups. One of the challenges that we have, and we don't do a lot of fairness or bias assessment because they're, well, first of all, so Salesforce is a platform. we create a number of AI models out of the box, give it to our customers, and then it goes into their org. And then the models are continued to be trained by the customer's data. We can't see their data or their models at that point. But many of our models, they're not making decisions based on protected categories. This is like, what is the best answer to for this customer service question? Or what is the best subject line for this email marketing campaign? So there's very little for us to do in terms of analyzing by protected categories. But that's one of the things that I do like with the tools. And I know a lot of tools for fairness and bias, they'll offer multiple definitions for that. And so it's just a matter of, I think, do you want, where is the maturity of your team? Are they primarily low no code? Do they really need like a very clicky GUI, or are they super nerdy and they can use libraries and do a lot of pro code work? So as people are thinking about which tool should I use, the interface and how much hand holding is provided is one of those considerations.
Great.
I think too, Kathy, it goes back to a point you made really earlier, which is ethical versus responsible. So defining what is the protected attribute, you can't come up with a standard definition. It depends on how the AI is being used, what the purpose is, what the data set is. There's lots of factors that go into your final decision, which comes to, this is the ethical lens. What is the protected attribute and how do we define that? And then put it into the responsibility part, which is the process.
Yeah, one of the challenges for us is with our chatbots. We want it to be equally accurate for everyone, regardless of how they speak. And we know that a lot of AI assistants, they don't work as well for African American vernacular English or Chicano American English. That when we see a chatbot fail, that's not labeled data. We don't know what vernacular is someone speaking, and is that why it's failing? And so we're in the process of acquiring that kind of data to be able to better train and make our chatbot more robust. But when we think about different attributes that you want your AI to be equally accurate for, equally fair for, they're often not labeled demographic kind of data. And it can be very difficult to then try and either train a model to be robust to those kinds of attributes, or be able to analyze the data and know, is your model failing on those attributes?
So one last question here, and then we'll turn it over. So we discussed responsible AI strategy and accountability within the enterprise. We discussed ethical data management. We discussed the risk management within the AI procurement process, and also some third-party tools. What as key takeaways, what do you think are the critical success factors for implementing a holistic, responsible AI strategy? Or have we covered them all?
I will start maybe. I think that from my perspective and my belief, that data-centric AI and ML is a key, meaning that data is crucial to understanding the resulting AI and ML models. I'm a true believer in data-centric approach, which at the end of the day, what the data that goes into your model determine the model, the robustness and the accuracy. So you need to start deal on the data level, and then the rest will come. I think this is a major takeaway from my perspective.
Yeah, I think you covered it very nicely here. The main takeaway I would offer is never rest on your laurels thinking that you've finally got it addressed. What we have learned from having the board is we're constantly finding a new use case and a new question that needs further exploration. And, you know, I can give you an example, which is people are saying, oh, well, as long as the AI has a human within the loop, then it should be okay because it's human centric. And they get comfortable with this term, but they forget to ask the question of, okay, but is the human in the loop actually being effective and collecting the data points from that human's interaction that is necessary for the model to be accurate and effective. But you'll see people, and it's just human nature, they gravitate towards, what is the answer? Tell me what to do and I will do that. But with this type of issue and with the technology emerging as quickly as it is and constantly changing, you really can't rest. You really got to constantly ask yourself, okay, how, and this comes from my litigation background, how can this possibly go wrong? And then explore every avenue and make sure you're not falling into a comfort zone of, okay, I put this in place, we should be covered. Always got to ask the questions.
For me, I think leadership is number one. You have got to have buy-in and the resources and the commitment from the top all the way through to the bottom. If you haven't set up the right incentive structure so that ensuring that your models are fair, that the AI is safe, that it's not just about trying to get stuff out there as quickly as possible, the whole move fast and break things mentality. You break things, you can, you know, we're not talking about things, we're talking about people. We're talking about like really high cost risk factors when you don't take it really seriously and you're trying to cut corners. And I think it's something that's particularly, you know, concerning right now in the tech industry with lots of layoffs and other considerations where companies are looking to save money. You know, there's always a risk that corners will be cut. And so you really have to have that leadership buy-in throughout so that people are incentivized to do the right thing, even when it's difficult, even when it's expensive. And that's where, yeah, to your point, Betsy, about the human in the loop. If the humans aren't incentivized to really interrogate the output and understand, is this the right answer? Is this the best answer? Is this the fair answer? Then it doesn't matter that there's a human in the loop. They just become a rubber stamp. But there also has to be a good design so that the human has the information that they can, if they put that effort in, they can understand if this AI is making a good, accurate, fair prediction. So I think the leadership is first and foremost as far as being successful and creating the culture you need to do this responsibly.
All right, so leadership is key. Adding a data-centric approach and never rest. That kind of fills out our prepared questions. We have another audience submitted question here around NIST. That NIST is releasing their risk management framework in 2 days. How can enterprises adopt the framework for their own organization? And Kathy, I believe you're involved in this. Maybe this is best for you.
Yeah, I'm really proud that for the next year, I'm a visiting AI fellow with NIST working specifically on the AI RMF. And one of the things I'll be doing is facilitating workshops with other folks that are using the framework to come up with a series of use cases and templates of how they are applying it. So for those of you that, well, whether you're familiar or not familiar with the framework, one of the pillars is the development of profiles. If you're from a cybersecurity background, you might think of it in terms of like, what's my security risk profile? Where are the things that we need to look? And so developing a number of profiles for how you use AI in different cases. So for example, we might create a profile for the use of AI in our marketing cloud product. And so working with different folks to think about how are you using AI? What are your risk profiles? And now what is that governance process that you use to assess and ensure that you are either developing and or implementing AI in this particular case responsibly?
Great. Are there any questions from the audience? Here's one. Will NIST also have an ethics scoring like they do for cyber?
There hasn't been any discussion of scoring. I don't know if that is something that will be developed later, but at least for right now, there isn't any kind of scoring. This is primarily about process, not about here's a checklist of questions and here's the right answers to them, but like, here's the process to follow. Are you looking at this? Are you looking at that?
Kathy, I have a follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
So in financial services, inevitably, when you have risk issues, especially ones that federal or state regulators get involved with, whether it's data or algorithms, inevitably internal risk controls have to have a measurement framework. So the scoring question came from that background, that intent that if you're going to have an ethics framework, then inevitably you have to report to management how you score, what your KRIs are, so to speak, and then management can take appropriate action, whether it's a model or it's a recommendation or any kind of control framework necessary to be put in place for AI in the business process.
Yeah, I cannot tell you how many times I have had conversations with engineers or data scientists, and they're like, just give me a number. Just give me a number. Like, the earlier question about case studies when we were first working with Einstein Analytics on a sentiment analysis model, doing red teaming, the engineers, not even me, but the engineers, I was so happy about this. They found on their own that the sentiment analysis model would flag as negative any sentiment that included a certain set of identifiers. So if you said, I am gay and I am proud, or I am a feminist and I am proud, there are 13 different identifiers, automatically skew negative. Even though it was clearly a positive sentiment, you include those identifiers, the model would skew negative. And when I flagged for the team and said, okay, can't launch this, we need to fix this. And they were like, okay, that sounds like the right thing, but what's the number? Like, you have to give me a number to hit so that I've got something to strive for. And I know if I hit this number, then you're going to give me the approval to then launch. And so that was really a difficult back and forth. And the answer we ended up providing was, well, the accuracy needs to be statistically similar to the accuracy for all of these other identifiers. But yes, there's this strong, especially among executives and engineers, they want a number to go with. And we just don't know what is a safe level of bias or robustness or what have you for specific models in specific use cases with specific user types to be able to say, yes, this is safe enough, this can go out into the world. And so I think there's a real hesitancy to try and come up with those numbers, but instead say, these are the processes that you should be following. And if you did all of these awesome, fantastic, but one of the things that came out from the workshop discussions, and I can include in a minute a link to the recordings from the workshops that we did, not every, especially when you get really big companies, not every organization is at the same level of maturity. And so some are going to be able to do a whole lot of those processes really well, and they're going to fall down on others. And another part of the organization may be great at some and then fall down on different ones. And so it's really a matter, at least with the framework as we have it now, of always trying to do better and do more of these kinds of processes rather than you get a red, yellow, green, you get a 90%, you get a 50% kind of score to say you are good, you are bad. And I'm
So
really
th-
curious, Avi and Betsy, what you think as
Yeah,
well.
so we provide scores, but we don't provide whether it's good enough for you or not. We let the user, the customer, to determine if in fairness score 80% based on based on the field balancing and distribution is good enough for them or not. But we do provide some scores and green, yellow, and red in order to give better assessment for the quality of the data that you're dealing with and where you need to pay your attention. But we're not recommending that this is good enough or not.
Yeah, we do come up with numbers and kind of a grade for the 5 pillars: explainability, transparency, robustness, privacy, security. But you won't have the same score on all 5 elements for each AI model. It really depends on what it's being used for. So you may have an instance in which it's very transparent, like a chatbot, but it's a chatbot not used for a very high risk activity. So it may be, you're asking about which shoes to buy or something like that. It's not going to have a high impact to the person. So explainability as to how the chatbot worked is not as important, and you've got the transparency. And so even though it's not very explainable, you may go ahead and be using that chatbot. But in other instances where it's making decisions about, whether you're going to get a loan or not, then you really do want that explainability very high, the transparency very high. And so a model that you have been using in a different scenario, and you try to apply it to this one, but you have low explainability and you're suddenly declining loans for people, you're going to have real big issues, and you wouldn't want to put that on the market. So it'll be hard to have one ethics grade. You're going to have to look at it in a matrix.
Correct.
All right, so we're approaching the top of the hour here. Do we have any last questions from the audience? Do we have anything else that you guys would like to share from within the panel? I've taken all the links over here, and we'll do a distribution afterwards. So I'll compile all those, and I see that Kathy also put the launch event, which is on the 26th. Avi, I know you have some case studies as well, so I'll include those when I do the email circulation as well. And Betsy provided the IBM research, the trustworthy AI, different frameworks over there, so those links will be there too. So thank you to all of you for your time. Really a fruitful discussion over here. And thanks to all of you for joining as well. We'll be doing another one of these in about a month or so, but we'll keep you posted.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.